The invitation arrived on her doorstep like a death sentence wrapped in crimson silk. Willa Donnelly stared at the black envelope, her hands trembling as she turned it over to reveal the wax seal, a crimson rose encircled by thorns. She didn't need to open it to know what it meant. Everyone in the city knew about the Blood Moon Ball, the once-a-decade event where the vampire nobility descended from their hidden realms to remind humanity of the ancient treaty that bound them together. What she hadn't expected was to receive a summons herself. Her fingers broke the seal, and elegant silver script shimmered across heavy parchment. Miss Willa Donnelly is hereby required to attend the Blood Moon Ball as tribute representative of the Southside Quarter. Refusal will result in forfeiture of the treaty's protection for your entire district. Attendance is mandatory. The Vampire King requires your presence. No, she whispered, sinking onto her threadbare couch. No, no, no. Her roommate Piper emerged from the kitchen with 2 mugs of coffee, took one look at Willa's face, and nearly dropped both cups. What happened? I've been summoned. To the ball. Willa's voice came out hollow. The vampire ball? But that's they only summon one person from each quarter as a symbolic gesture. Why would they choose you? That was exactly what Willa wanted to know. She was nobody special, a 23-year-old archives clerk at the city library, living in a cramped apartment, struggling to pay off her late mother's medical debts. She had no political connections, no special skills, nothing that would make her stand out to the immortal aristocracy that ruled the night. There has to be a mistake, Willa said, reading the invitation again, hoping the words would change. You can't refuse, Piper said quietly. If you don't go, they'll revoke protection for the entire South Side. Do you know what that means? The rogue vampires, the blood cartels, they'd tear through our quarter like wolves through sheep. Willa did know. The treaty between humans and vampires had stood for 300 years, ever since the Great Revelation when vampires emerged from the shadows and revealed themselves to the world. In exchange for recognized territories and legal rights to blood donation centers, the vampire courts agreed to protect human populations from rogue vampires and enforce strict laws about feeding and turning. But the treaty came with obligations on both sides, and the Blood Moon Ball was one of them, a reminder that humanity existed at the sufferance of creatures far older and more powerful. I don't know how to dance, Willa said stupidly. I don't even own a dress nice enough for something like this. Piper set down the coffee and grabbed Willa's shoulders. We have 5 days. We'll figure it out. Those 5 days passed in a blur of panic and preparation. The city provided a dress they always did for tribute representatives, since most couldn't afford the kind of gown required for a vampire ball. When it arrived, Willa nearly wept at its beauty. Midnight blue silk that seemed to capture starlight, with a sweetheart neckline and a full skirt that whispered like secrets when she moved. It fit perfectly, as if made specifically for her body, which only increased her unease. Piper found old ballroom dancing tutorials online, and they spent hours in their tiny living room with Willa stumbling over her own feet, trying to learn the basic steps of a waltz. She was hopeless at it, but what choice did she have? On the night of the ball, a sleek black car arrived to collect her. The driver was human, but wore the insignia of the vampire court, a crimson rose on his collar. He didn't speak as they drove through the city, passing from the bright commercial districts into older neighborhoods where gas lamps still flickered and cobblestones replaced asphalt. Finally, they arrived at the Thorn Gate, an ancient cathedral that had been converted into the vampire court's public-facing venue. Willa stepped out of the car on shaking legs, clutching a small evening bag that contained nothing but her identification and a tube of lipstick. Other young people were arriving as well, the tribute representatives from the other quarters, all looking equally terrified beneath their formal attire. The cathedral doors opened like a mouth, and music spilled out, not modern music, but the sweeping grandeur of a full orchestra playing something that sounded like it came from another century. Willa forced herself to climb the steps and cross the threshold. Inside was another world entirely. The cathedral's vaulted ceiling soared overhead, now hung with hundreds of crystal chandeliers that cast everything in warm, golden light. The pews had been removed to create a vast ballroom floor of polished black marble, and everywhere she looked, there were vampires. They were impossible to miss. Every single one had skin like porcelain or marble, flawlessly pale, almost luminescent. Their hair ranged from platinum blonde to pure white, styled in everything from elaborate updos to long, flowing manes. They moved with a grace that made the human guests look clumsy by comparison, and they were all heartbreakingly beautiful in a way that seemed almost cruel. The men wore tailored suits or elaborate period clothing, while the women drifted in gowns that belonged in museums or fantasy films. And they were watching the humans with undisguised interest, like cats watching mice. Willa tried to make herself small as she joined the other tribute representatives along the wall. A woman in a crimson gown, human by the warmth of her skin tone, approached with a clipboard. "Names and quarters, please form a line. You'll be announced when it's time for the tribute dance." "The what?" Willa asked, fear spiking in her chest. The woman gave her a pitying look. "Didn't you read the full invitation? Each tribute representative must dance with a member of the vampire court. It's tradition." Willa's stomach dropped to her feet. She could barely dance with Piper in their living room, and now she was expected to perform in front of hundreds of immortal predators who would judge her every stumble. The evening began with a formal receiving line. The vampire nobility entered in order of rank, and the humans bowed or curtsied as they passed. Willa tried to keep her head down, but she couldn't help stealing glances at the creatures who ruled the night. Then the music changed, a single violin note that seemed to make the air itself hold its breath. The crowd parted like water, creating a clear path to the main entrance, and every vampire in the room bowed deeply. The vampire king had arrived. Willa had never seen him before, few humans had. He appeared in public rarely, preferring to rule through his council and appointed governors. But there was no mistaking who he was. He stood at least 6 feet tall, with a presence that seemed to fill the entire cathedral. His skin was the pale white of fresh snow, and his hair fell to his shoulders in waves of pure silver white. His face could have been carved by a master sculptor, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, full lips that suggested both cruelty and sensuality. But it was his eyes that made Willa forget to breathe. They were the deep crimson of old blood, ancient and knowing, and they seemed to see through flesh and bone to the trembling soul beneath. He wore black, head to toe, a perfectly tailored suit that probably cost more than Willa's entire apartment building, with a high-collared shirt and an antique silver pendant at his throat. Power radiated from him like heat from a flame. His name was Constantine Ravenscar, and he had ruled the vampire territories for over 500 years. He moved through the crowd without hurry, accepting the bows and curtsies of his subjects with barely a glance. But then his eyes swept across the tribute representatives, and Willa felt the moment his gaze landed on her like a physical touch. Time seemed to slow. Those crimson eyes locked with hers, and she saw something flash in their depth: surprise, recognition. It was gone too quickly for her to be sure, but he was looking at her, only at her, and the weight of that attention made her knees weak. Then he moved on, taking his place on a raised dais at the far end of the ballroom, and Willa remembered to breathe again. "Did you see that?" whispered the girl next to her, a petite blonde in a pink gown. "He looked right at you." "I'm sure he was just scanning the crowd," Willa managed, though her heart was racing. The dancing began soon after. Vampires and their chosen human partners swept across the floor in elegant waltzes and elaborate period dances. Willa watched with growing dread, trying to memorize the steps, knowing it was hopeless. Then came the announcement she'd been dreading. "Will the tribute representatives please take their positions for the ceremonial dance?" Willa's legs moved on autopilot, carrying her to the center of the floor with the other 7 representatives. The vampires who would partner them had already been chosen, she learned, assigned by rank and tradition. She stood there, exposed and terrified, waiting to discover which immortal predator would be disappointed by her clumsy feat. The music began a sweeping waltz that Willa vaguely recognized from her frantic practice sessions. The vampire partners approached, and Willa watched as they claimed the other representatives one by one. A tall male vampire with white hair braided with silver threads took the blonde girl's hand. An elegant female vampire led away a young man who looked on the verge of passing out. Willa stood alone in the center of the floor, confusion mixing with her fear. Had they forgotten about her? Was she not supposed to dance after all? Then the crowd parted again, and her blood turned to ice. Constantine Ravenscar was walking toward her, his crimson eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her want to flee. The vampire king himself was going to be her partner. This couldn't be happening. Kings didn't dance with tribute representatives, they barely acknowledged them. Yet here he was, crossing the polished marble floor with predatory grace, and there was nowhere for Willa to run. He stopped in front of her so close she could smell him expensive cologne layered over something darker, something that spoke of old stone and older blood. He was even more overwhelming up close, his beauty almost painful to look at. "Miss Donnelly," he said, and his voice was like velvet over steel, carrying an accent that suggested multiple languages and centuries of use. "May I have this dance?" It wasn't really a question. Willa managed a shaky curtsy, the way she'd been taught. "Your Majesty." He extended his hand and she placed hers in it, half expecting his skin to be cold like a corpse. Instead, he was cool, but not unpleasantly so, like marble that had been sitting in shadow. His fingers closed around hers with careful strength, and then his other hand settled at her waist. The music swelled, and they began to move. For about 10 seconds, Willa managed to follow his lead. Constantine was an excellent dancer, moving with the kind of grace that came from centuries of practice, and his lead was firm enough that she could almost pretend she knew what she was doing. Then her heel caught on the edge of her gown, her weight shifted wrong, and she came down hard on his foot. She stumbled, would have fallen if his arm hadn't tightened around her waist, and she heard her own voice squeak out an apology. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I told them I couldn't dance. I'm terrible at this. Please don't." She looked up, terrified of what she'd see in those ancient crimson eyes. Anger, disgust, the cold fury of a king whose dignity had been damaged by a clumsy human. Instead, Constantine Ravenscar started to laugh. It began as a low chuckle in his chest, but it grew into genuine laughter, warm and rich and utterly unexpected. His head tilted back slightly, and the sound filled the space between them, drawing shocked stares from every vampire in the room. "You stepped on my foot," he said, sounding delighted rather than angry. "In 500 years of dancing, do you know how many people have dared to step on my foot?" Willa shook her head mutely, still caught in his arms, still half convinced this was some kind of trick before he punished her. "None," he said, his eyes bright with amusement. "Not one. They're all too terrified, too careful. But you—" He spun her gently, giving her time to find her footing. "You're genuinely trying, aren't you? Despite being terrified, despite having no idea what you're doing, you're here, attempting to waltz with the vampire king." "I didn't exactly have a choice," Willa said before she could stop herself, then immediately wanted to bite her tongue. "You didn't sass the vampire king." But Constantine just laughed again, softer this time. "No, I suppose you didn't. But you could have frozen, could have refused to dance, could have made excuses. Instead, you put your hand in mine and tried." His expression shifted, becoming more serious. "That takes a particular kind of courage." He adjusted his hold, pulling her slightly closer. "Here, follow my lead more closely. Stop thinking about the steps and just feel the music." Willa wanted to tell him that was impossible, but his hand was warm at her waist and his grip was firm, and somehow, impossibly, her feet began to find the rhythm. He moved with such certainty that her body followed almost without thought, and they completed a full turn without her stumbling. "There," he murmured. "You see? You can dance." "You're just a really good lead," Willa said breathlessly. "I've had considerable practice," he agreed, amusement still dancing in his voice. "Though I must say, this is the most entertaining dance I've had in decades, possibly centuries." The song was coming to an end, but Willa found herself oddly reluctant for it to finish. Despite her terror, despite everything, there was something intoxicating about being this close to Constantine, about being the focus of all that ancient power and attention. As the final notes faded, he released her waist but kept hold of her hand, raising it to his lips. His kiss was feather light against her knuckles, cool and formal, but it sent electricity racing up her arm. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Donnelly," he said quietly. "It has been memorable." Then he was gone, returning to his dais, and Willa stood in the center of the ballroom floor with hundreds of eyes on her and her hand still tingling where his lips had touched. The rest of the evening passed in a daze. Other vampires asked her to dance. She was apparently now interesting by virtue of having made the king laugh, but none of them had Constantine's patient guidance, and she stumbled through the dances with apologetic embarrassment. Still, no one seemed angry. If anything, they treated her with a strange new respect, as if the king's attention had granted her some kind of status. Throughout it all, she felt Constantine's eyes on her. She would glance toward the dais and find him watching, his expression unreadable, and each time their eyes met, something hot and confusing twisted in her chest. Finally, mercifully, the ball wound down. The tribute representatives were dismissed with formal thanks and escorted to their waiting cars. Willa sank into the leather seat with relief, her feet aching and her head spinning. She was home, safe in her apartment with Piper demanding to know every detail, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock. A car will collect you. We have much to discuss. K.R." "Who's K.R.?" Piper asked, reading over her shoulder. Willa's mouth went dry. "Constantine Ravenscar. The Vampire King has your phone number?" "Apparently." "And he wants to see you again?" "Apparently." They stared at each other, both too shocked to speak. The car arrived at 7 exactly, as promised. Willa had spent the day in a state of numb panic, trying on and discarding every outfit she owned before settling on a simple black dress that seemed appropriate for meeting vampire royalty. She had no idea what Constantine wanted, but she couldn't ignore a direct summons from the king. The driver took her to a different location this time, a sleek modern building in the financial district that appeared to be high-end condominiums. They bypassed the lobby entirely, taking a private elevator that required a key card. It climbed for what felt like forever, before opening directly into a penthouse. Constantine was waiting by the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the glittering city. He'd traded his formal attire for dark slacks and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing pale, muscular forearms. It made him look more approachable, though no less powerful. "Miss Donnelly," he said, turning as she entered, "thank you for coming." "Did I have a choice?" The words came out before she could stop them, and she immediately cursed her inability to keep her mouth shut around him. But again, he just seemed amused. "You always have a choice. I would prefer, however, that you choose to stay and talk with me." He gestured to a seating area near the windows. "Please sit. Would you like something to drink? Wine? Tea? I have food as well if you're hungry." The consideration in his voice threw her off balance. She'd expected imperious commands, not polite offers of refreshment. "Tea would be nice, thank you." He moved to a kitchen area. The Vampire King had a kitchen in his penthouse, and she heard water running, the clink of china. A few minutes later, he returned with 2 delicate cups on saucers. The tea smelled of bergamot and honey. "You drink tea?" she asked, accepting the cup. "I can consume some foods and drinks, though they provide no sustenance. I've developed a fondness for tea over the centuries." He settled into the chair across from her, cradling his own cup. "It's one of the small pleasures I've retained from my human life." "You were human once." It wasn't a question all vampires had been human originally, according to the lore, but hearing him acknowledge it made him seem more real somehow. 543 years ago, in what is now Romania," Constantine said, "I was turned during a war whose name has been forgotten by everyone except historians and vampires." His crimson eyes studied her over the rim of his cup. "But that's not why I asked you here." "Why did you?" Willa asked, her heart beating faster. "Why summon me to the ball specifically, and why ask me here now?" "Direct questions. I appreciate that." He set down his cup and leaned forward slightly. "The truth is, Willa, may I call you Willa?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "The truth is, I've been aware of you for some time. 6 months, to be precise." Ice formed in Willa's stomach. "What?" "I make it a practice to review reports on all human citizens who work in positions touching vampire affairs," Constantine explained. "The city archives contain extensive records about the treaty, about vampire history and law. You work there." "I'm a junior clerk," Willa said. "I file documents and process requests. I barely even see the vampire-related materials." "Yes, but 3 months ago, you filed a request for access to the original treaty documents. Do you remember?" Willa thought back. "That was someone from the city council wanted historical verification of something. I was just processing their request. The request was denied, but it flagged you in our system. So I looked into you more closely." Constantine's expression was unreadable. "I discovered that your mother died 2 years ago from complications related to a vampire feeding incident." All the air left Willa's lungs. She set down her teacup with shaking hands. How do you know about that? It's my business to know. Your mother, Catherine Donnelly, volunteered at a blood donation center. A newly turned vampire lost control and attacked her. She survived the immediate attack but developed complications and infection that the vampire's venom introduced to her bloodstream. The medical bills bankrupted your family, and she died within a year. Tears burned in Willa's eyes. The vampire court did nothing. He was punished, sure, some fine, some probation. But there was no compensation for my mother, no help with her medical care. We lost everything, and she died anyway. I know, Constantine said quietly, and I am sorry. That should not have happened. The vampire responsible was insufficiently trained, and the court's response was inadequate. He paused. I reviewed your mother's case personally after discovering your identity. The vampire in question has since been exiled from all territories, and I've made changes to the training protocols for new vampires. That doesn't bring her back, Willa said bitterly. No, it doesn't. Nothing can. He met her eyes steadily. But I wanted you to know that I take such failures seriously, and I wanted to meet you in person to understand the woman whose life was shaped by my court's negligence. So the ball invitation that was about my mother? Partially. Also about curiosity. He tilted his head, studying her. You had every reason to hate vampires, yet you came to the ball. You danced with me, made me laugh, treated me like a person rather than a monster. I wanted to know why. Willa was silent for a long moment, processing this revelation. Finally, she said, I don't hate vampires. I hate what happened to my mother, and I hate that the system failed her. But hating an entire species for the actions of one individual would make me no better than the humans who want to overturn the treaty and start a war. She met his crimson gaze. My mother wouldn't have wanted that. She believed in the treaty, believed humans and vampires could coexist. Even after everything, I still believe that too. Something shifted in Constantine's expression, a warmth that hadn't been there before. You are remarkable, Willa Donnelly. I'm really not, she said. I'm just trying to survive and honor my mother's memory. That alone makes you remarkable. He stood, moving to the windows. I have a proposition for you. Willa's guard went up immediately. What kind of proposition? A job. Here, working directly for the court. We need humans in our administration, people who understand both human and vampire perspectives, who can help bridge the gaps between our peoples. You have experience with archival work, and you have personal insight into the ways our system can fail. I would like to offer you a position as a cultural liaison. That sounds like a made-up title, Willa said suspiciously. It's newly created, yes. For you specifically. Constantine turned to face her. You would review cases like your mother's, identify systemic problems, recommend solutions. You would help train vampires in human cultural sensitivity. You would serve as an advisor on matters of human-vampire relations. He named a salary that made Willa's jaw drop. It would include full medical coverage, housing if you need it, and access to court resources. Why? Willa asked. Why me? There must be hundreds of people more qualified. Qualification isn't just about credentials, Constantine said. It's about perspective, integrity, courage. You have all three. He moved closer, his presence overwhelming in the intimate space. And if I'm being entirely honest, I want you close. I want the opportunity to know you better. Willa's breath caught. Your Majesty. Constantine, he interrupted gently. When we're alone, please call me Constantine. Constantine, she repeated, and the name felt strange and thrilling on her tongue. I don't understand what's happening here. Neither do I, entirely, he admitted. I haven't felt this drawn to anyone in centuries. There's something about you, Willa, something that calls to me. Your courage, your compassion, the way you stepped on my foot and apologized like it was the end of the world. His lips quirked in a half-smile. I would like the chance to explore this connection, if you're willing. You're the Vampire King, Willa said helplessly. I'm a human clerk with student debt and a cramped apartment. This is insane. I've lived for over 500 years, Constantine replied. I've learned that sanity is overrated, and the most meaningful experiences often appear insane from the outside. He extended his hand. Take the job. Give us a chance. If after a month you're unhappy, You can leave with excellent references and 6 months severance pay. You have nothing to lose." Willa looked at his outstretched hand, pale and elegant, and offering her a chance at a completely different life. Every rational part of her brain screamed that this was dangerous, that getting involved with the Vampire King was asking for heartbreak at best and destruction at worst. But she remembered the warmth of his laughter, the patience in his teaching, the genuine regret in his eyes when he spoke of her mother. She thought about the possibility of actually making a difference, of preventing other families from suffering the way hers had. And beneath all the rational arguments, there was something else, a pull, an attraction, a sense that if she walked away from this moment, she would regret it for the rest of her life. She placed her hand in his. Constantine's fingers closed around hers, cool and strong, and his smile was radiant. "Excellent. You can start Monday." The next few weeks transformed Willa's life beyond recognition. She gave notice at the library, moved into a beautiful apartment provided by the court far nicer than anywhere she could have afforded on her own, and threw herself into her new role. The work was challenging but fascinating. She reviewed case files, interviewed human victims of vampire-related incidents, consulted with vampire administrators about cultural misunderstandings. Constantine had given her real authority, and to her surprise, the vampire court members actually listened to her recommendations. She also saw Constantine almost daily. He made excuses to drop by her office, to invite her to meetings, to ask her opinion on various matters. They fell into a pattern of having tea together in the evenings, talking about everything from court politics to human history to their personal lives. Willa learned that Constantine was wickedly intelligent, deeply honorable, and surprisingly lonely. For all his power and prestige, he was isolated by his position. Most vampires were too afraid or too ambitious to be genuine with him, and humans saw him as either a monster or a useful political connection. "You're different," he told her one evening as they sat in his penthouse, watching the sun set over the city. "You argue with me." "Is that a good thing?" Willa asked, worried she'd overstepped. "It's a wonderful thing," Constantine said warmly. "You're not afraid to tell me when you think I'm wrong, but you also listen when I explain my reasoning. You challenge me to be better, to think beyond the way things have always been done." He turned to look at her, his crimson eyes soft. "You make me feel human again." Willa's heart skipped. They'd been dancing around the attraction between them for weeks, neither quite willing to acknowledge it directly, but the air between them now felt charged, heavy with possibility. "Constantine," she said softly, "I need to know something. Is this whatever this is between us, is it real? Or am I just, I don't know, a novelty? The human who made you laugh?" He moved closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His touch was cool and gentle. "You're not a novelty, Willa. You're the first person in centuries to make me feel alive, to make me want to be more than just a king managing territories and politics." His thumb brushed her cheekbone. "I am falling in love with you, and it terrifies me because I know how fragile human lives are. I know that even if you feel the same, our time together is limited by your mortality." "I could be turned," Willa whispered, the thought escaping before she could stop it. Constantine's expression turned anguished. "I would never ask that of you. Do you understand what it means to be a vampire? To watch everyone you've ever known grow old and die while you remain frozen in time? To survive only on blood? To be bound to the night? To carry the weight of immortality?" He shook his head. "I wouldn't wish this existence on someone I love." "What if I wanted it anyway?" Willa asked, her heart racing. "Not now, maybe, but someday? What if I chose it?" "Then I would require that you wait," Constantine said firmly. "Live your human life fully, for years, to be certain. Turning is irrevocable, Willa. I won't risk you regretting it." His hand dropped from her face. "Perhaps it's better if we don't pursue this. I'm being selfish, wanting you when I can offer no true future." Willa caught his hand, holding it between both of hers. "Don't I get a say in what I want? Maybe our time is limited. Maybe there are complications we'll have to navigate. But I'm falling in love with you too, Constantine, and I don't want to walk away just because it might be difficult." His eyes searched hers, ancient and hopeful and afraid all at once. Then he leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away, and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if he feared breaking her. But when Willa made a small sound of encouragement and leaned into him, it deepened. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she felt the carefully controlled strength in his body, the way he held himself back even as he kissed her with increasing passion. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, though Constantine didn't technically need to breathe, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he murmured. "Court you properly, give you time to be certain." "Okay," Willa agreed, giddy with happiness and desire, and the taste of him still on her lips. "We'll take it slow." Taking it slow, it turned out, was relative. They spent every evening together, either in his penthouse or exploring the city's vampire districts, which had a strange beauty at night. Constantine introduced her to vampire culture, the art, the music, the elaborate codes of honor that governed their society. He also began teaching her to dance properly, which led to many evenings in his living room with music playing and his arms around her as he guided her through waltzes and tangos. She still stepped on his feet occasionally, and he still laughed every time, his joy unguarded and genuine. They took walks in his private garden, carefully shaded so he could enjoy it even during the day's lingering twilight. They attended concerts and exhibitions together. Constantine sent her flowers daily, old-fashioned courtship gestures that made her feel cherished and precious. And they talked. Endless conversations about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams and fears. Willa told him about her childhood, her mother's kindness, her love of old books and rainy days. Constantine shared stories from his long life, some tragic, some triumphant, all fascinating. He was careful with her, always asking permission before touching her, always respectful of her boundaries. But the desire between them grew stronger each day, a tension that left Willa aching and breathless. 3 months into their relationship, everything changed. Willa was working late in her office when she heard shouting from the main council chamber. She hurried toward the commotion and found a crowd of vampires arguing loudly, their white hair and pale skin making them look like a gathering of ghosts. "What's happening?" she asked one of the human administrators. "Attempted coup," the woman said grimly. "A faction of elder vampires tried to assassinate the king. They were caught, but it's bad, Willa, really bad." Willa's blood turned to ice. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring protests, until she reached the inner chamber where Constantine stood surrounded by his personal guard. He was alive, unharmed, and the relief that flooded through her was so intense she nearly collapsed. His eyes found hers across the room, and something in his expression softened. The conspirators were being held under guard, 5 ancient vampires with cold eyes and sneering expressions. Their leader, a tall male with white hair cascading down his back and eyes like frozen amber, glared at Constantine with undisguised hatred. "You've grown weak, Ravenscar," the vampire spat. "Soft, playing house with your human pet while our people suffer under the restrictions of that cursed treaty." "The treaty keeps us from war," Constantine said, his voice deadly calm. "It ensures our survival and our prosperity." "It ensures our servitude," the conspirator shot back. "We are apex predators, yet we submit to human laws, human oversight, drinking from bags and vials like tame animals. Our ancestors would weep to see what we've become." "Our ancestors would weep to see the bodies stacked like cordwood in the wars before the treaty," Constantine replied. "I was there, Vasile. I remember what that world looked like. I remember watching entire cities burn, watching both vampires and humans slaughtered wholesale. The treaty isn't perfect, but it's better than the alternative." "Then you're a fool," Vasile said. "And when you fall, whether today or tomorrow or a century from now, someone stronger will take your place, someone who remembers what it means to be a vampire." Constantine's expression didn't change, but Willa saw the muscle jump in his jaw. "Take them to the holding cells. They'll face trial before the full council." As the conspirators were led away, Vasile's eyes found Willa. He smiled, revealing elongated fangs. "Enjoy your human while she lasts, Ravenscar. Her kind are so terribly fragile." It was a threat, clear and unmistakable. Constantine moved so fast he was just a blur, suddenly in front of Vasile, with his hand wrapped around the other vampire's throat. "If you or anyone associated with you touches her, even looks at her wrong, I will personally ensure you spend the rest of eternity in a cell so deep and dark you'll forget what the world looks like. Am I understood?" Vasily managed a nod, and Constantine released him, stepping back with visible effort to control himself. After the conspirators were secured and the chamber cleared, Constantine found Willa waiting in his office. He pulled her into his arms without a word, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I'm okay," she said softly, running her hands up and down his back. "You're okay. We're okay." "They threatened you," Constantine said, his voice rough. "Used you to get to me." "I know. But they failed." Willa pulled back enough to see his face. "Constantine, I knew this wouldn't be easy. I knew there would be vampires who resented our relationship, who would see me as a weakness." "You're not a weakness," he interrupted fiercely. "You're my strength. You're what keeps me grounded, what reminds me why I fight for the treaty and peace." His hands came up to frame her face. "But Vasily was right about one thing. Your kind are fragile, and His voice broke. "I cannot lose you, Willa. I cannot." She saw the fear in his ancient eyes, the genuine terror of someone who had lived for centuries and finally found something worth fearing the loss of. "Then protect me," Willa said. "Not by pushing me away, but by keeping me close. Teach me how to defend myself. Give me guards if you need to, but don't end this because you're afraid, please." Constantine searched her face for a long moment, then kissed her with desperate intensity. When he pulled back, his expression was resolved. "Move in with me," he said. "Here, in the court complex. My penthouse has the best security in the city, and my personal guards are the most skilled warriors in the vampire territories. Let me keep you safe." Willa knew she should probably think about it, consider the implications, maintain some independence. But she was tired of being cautious, tired of taking things slow when every instinct screamed that she wanted to be as close to this man as possible. "Okay," she said simply. Relief and joy washed over Constantine's face. He kissed her again, softer this time, and murmured against her lips, "I love you, Willa Donnelly." "I love you too," she whispered back. Moving in with the Vampire King was surreal. Willa's belongings looked absurdly out of place in the elegant penthouse, her worn paperbacks next to his first editions, her comfortable clothes in the closet beside his tailored suits. But Constantine seemed to delight in every sign of her presence, often picking up one of her books or wearing a sweater she'd left draped over a chair just to feel close to her. They settled into domesticity with surprising ease. Constantine didn't sleep, vampires didn't need to, but he would lie beside her in the massive bed, reading or working on his tablet while she slept, claiming he loved watching her peaceful expression. They cooked together sometimes, even though he couldn't eat the food, because he enjoyed the ritual of it. They established small traditions: tea every evening at sunset, dancing in the living room to old records, late-night conversations on the balcony under the stars. The trial of the conspirators proceeded swiftly. The evidence was overwhelming, and the Vampire Council had no choice but to find them guilty of treason. Constantine showed mercy despite their attempt on his life, sentencing them to exile rather than execution, though Vasily's threats against Willa earned him an additional century in isolation first. Life should have been perfect. Willa was in love, doing meaningful work, living in luxury she'd never imagined. But as the months passed, she became increasingly aware of the stares when they appeared in public together, the whispered conversations that stopped when she entered a room. Some vampires resented her relationship with their king. Some humans thought she was a traitor or a fool. And everyone, it seemed, had opinions about how inappropriate it was for an immortal ruler to become entangled with a mortal woman. "Ignore them," Constantine would tell her, but Willa could see the tension building in him as well. The political pressure was mounting. Several council members had formally requested that he end the relationship, or at least keep it private. There were concerns about succession, about the image of the court, about what would happen when Willa inevitably aged and died. The breaking point came 6 months into their relationship, at a formal dinner with the Vampire Council and several human political leaders. Willa was seated beside Constantine, and everything was proceeding normally until one of the human counselors, a pompous man named Richard Hartford, had too much wine and decided to voice his thoughts. It's unseemly, really," he said loudly enough for the whole table to hear. "The Vampire King shacking up with some common girl. What message does that send about vampire-human relations? That our women are just playthings for immortal predators?" The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Constantine's hand tightened on his wineglass, and Willa heard the crystal crack. "Counselor Hartford," Constantine said, his voice soft and absolutely lethal. "You will apologize to Miss Donnelly immediately, or you will find yourself removed from this dinner and from your position." Hartford blanched, but held his ground, emboldened by alcohol and his own sense of importance. "I'm simply saying what everyone's thinking, Your Majesty. This relationship is inappropriate and damaging to both our peoples. She's a human, for God's sake. She'll be old and gray in a few decades while you remain unchanged. It's unnatural." Willa felt tears prick her eyes, not because Hartford's words were anything she hadn't thought herself, but because hearing them said so cruelly, in front of everyone, made them real in a way they hadn't been before. "Enough," Constantine said, standing. His power filled the room, making the air heavy and electric. "Counselor Hartford, you are dismissed from this dinner and suspended from your duties pending a formal review. Leave now, before I do something we'll both regret." Hartford stumbled out, and the dinner continued in uncomfortable silence. But the damage was done. Willa could feel the eyes on her, could sense the agreement in some of the faces around the table. They might not say it as crudely as Hartford had, but they thought the same thing. She didn't belong here. That night, back in the penthouse, Constantine was furious. He paced like a caged animal, his usual grace replaced by jerky, agitated movements. "I should have done more than suspend him. I should have—" He stopped, running his hands through his white hair. "How dare he speak to you that way? How dare he?" "He said what a lot of people think," Willa said quietly from where she sat curled on the couch. Constantine spun to face her. "Then they're all fools." "Are they?" Willa asked. "Constantine, be honest. What future do we really have? I'm 24. In 10 years, I'll be middle-aged by human standards. In 20, I'll be elderly. And you'll still look exactly as you do now." She blinked back tears. "How can this possibly work long-term?" He crossed to her in 2 strides, kneeling in front of the couch so they were eye-level. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you?" "What?" she whispered. "I see the woman who made me laugh for the first time in decades. I see courage and compassion and brilliant intelligence. I see someone who makes me want to be better, to build a better world." His hands came up to cradle her face. "I see my future, Willa. However long or short it may be, I want to spend it with you." "But what happens when I'm old?" she asked, tears spilling over now. "When I can't keep up with you anymore, when I'm wrinkled and slow and dying?" "Then I will love you wrinkled and slow," Constantine said fiercely. "I will treasure every moment, every line on your face that tells the story of your life, every silver hair, every precious breath. And when you die," his voice cracked, "when you die, I will mourn you for the rest of my immortal existence, and I will still count myself fortunate to have known you, to have loved you." Willa sobbed, pulling him close. "I wish I could stay with you forever." "I know," he murmured, holding her tight. "I know. Love." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, acknowledging the fundamental impossibility of their situation while refusing to let it break them. In the weeks that followed, Willa found herself thinking more and more about transformation. She researched vampire turning extensively, reading every account she could find, interviewing vampires about their experiences. The picture that emerged was complex and sobering. Turning was excruciating days of agony as the vampire venom rewrote human biology. There was a chance of death. Maybe 1 in 20 turned humans didn't survive. Those who did survive faced an existence fundamentally changed, needing blood to survive, unable to tolerate sunlight, watching human friends and family age and die while they remained frozen in time. But they also gained strength, speed, heightened senses, and potentially centuries of life. Many vampires spoke of their turning as a rebirth despite the difficulties. And crucially, turned vampires could still love, still feel, still experience joy. Willa thought about her mother, about honoring her memory. Catherine had believed in building bridges between humans and vampires. What better bridge could there be than someone who had been both? She thought about the work she was doing, the changes she was making in vampire-human relations. Imagine what she could accomplish with centuries instead of decades. And she thought about Constantine, about loving him for 50 or 60 years versus loving him for 500. She knew what she wanted. The question was whether he would agree. She chose her moment carefully. 8 months into their relationship, Constantine surprised her with a weekend trip to his private estate in the mountains, a beautiful old castle that predated the treaty by centuries. It was autumn, and the forests surrounding the castle blazed with color. They spent a perfect day together. Constantine showed her the castle's library, its art collection, the gardens that had been tended for generations. They had dinner on the terrace, real food for her, wine for both of them, and watched the sun set in glory over the mountains. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, Willa took a deep breath and said, "I want to talk about turning." Constantine went very still. "Willa, please just listen," she said, taking his hand. "I've been researching it for months. I know the risks. I know what I'd be giving up, but I also know what I'd be gaining." She met his crimson eyes steadily. "I want to be with you, Constantine. Not for a handful of decades, but for centuries. I want time to make a real difference in the world, to see the changes we're starting come to fruition. I want to experience everything vampire culture has to offer, to truly bridge both worlds." "You would be giving up the sun," Constantine said, his voice pained. "Giving up aging naturally, having children, so many human experiences." "I know, and I've thought about all of it." Willa squeezed his hand. "I'm not interested in having children, I never have been. I love the night more than the day. And as for aging naturally, I'd rather have centuries with you than a normal human lifespan without you." "You're so young," Constantine argued. "How can you know what you'll want in 10 years, 20 years? "I can't know for certain," Willa admitted, "but I know what I want now, and I know my own mind. I'm not asking you to turn me tomorrow, Constantine. I'm asking you to agree in principle, to set a timeline. Maybe 5 years from now, or 10, long enough to be sure, but not so long that I've spent half my mortal life waiting." Constantine stood, moving to the terrace railing. His white hair gleamed in the starlight, and his profile could have been carved from marble. "If I agree to this, if I turn you someday, and you come to regret it, that would destroy me, Willa. Utterly." She went to him, wrapping her arms around him from behind, pressing her cheek against his back. "And if you refuse, if I grow old and die and leave you alone again, how will that feel?" He turned in her arms, pulling her close. "Like losing the sun," he whispered. "Then let me stay," Willa said. "Let me choose this. Trust me to know what I want." Constantine was silent for a long moment, his chin resting on top of her head. Finally, he said, 10 years. Live as a human for 10 more years. Experience everything you can. If at the end of that time you still want to be turned, I will do it myself." He pulled back to look at her face. "But you have to promise me you'll really live during those years, Willa. Travel, learn, grow. Don't just wait for turning. Embrace your humanity while you have it." Relief and joy flooded through her. "I promise." He kissed her then, deep and passionate, pouring centuries of loneliness and hope and love into the connection between them. When they finally broke apart, both trembling, he lifted her into his arms, vampire strength making it effortless, and carried her inside to the castle's master bedroom. "I love you," he said as he laid her gently on the bed. "My brave, brilliant, impossible human." "I love you too," Willa replied, pulling him down to her. "My vampire king." They made love for the first time that night, and it was everything Willa had dreamed, passionate and tender, overwhelming and perfect. Constantine was careful with his strength, but uninhibited with his desire, and he took his time learning every inch of her body, every sound she made, every touch that made her gasp. Afterward, lying tangled together in the massive bed, Willa felt more certain than ever that she'd made the right choice. This was where she belonged, in Constantine's arms, in his life, in his world. The years that followed were the happiest of Willa's life. True to her promise, she threw herself into living fully. She and Constantine traveled extensively to vampire courts in Europe, where he introduced her to ancient friends, to human cities where they explored art and culture, to remote places of natural beauty where they could be alone together. She continued her work with the vampire court, expanding her role to include international relations. The changes she implemented became models for other territories, improving vampire-human cooperation worldwide. She wrote papers, gave speeches, became a recognized voice in the ongoing dialogue about cross-species coexistence. She also maintained her human connections, spending time with Piper and other friends, attending her college reunion, staying grounded in the human world even as she moved increasingly in vampire circles. And through it all, her relationship with Constantine deepened. They became true partners in every sense, in work, in life, in love. He was her greatest supporter and her most honest critic. She was his anchor to humanity and his inspiration to keep fighting for peace. They had disagreements, of course. Willa's temper could flare hot, and Constantine's age sometimes made him stubborn about change. But they learned to fight fair, to listen to each other, to choose love over pride. The vampire community slowly accepted her presence in Constantine's life, especially as her work produced tangible results. The human community was more mixed, but Willa found she cared less and less about public opinion as time went on. She knew her own heart, and that was enough. 5 years into their relationship, Constantine proposed. It was simple and perfect, just the two of them in his penthouse garden at twilight, surrounded by night-blooming flowers. "I know we've talked about turning," he said, kneeling before her with a ring of silver and rubies, "and I'm still prepared to honor that agreement. But before that, before you become immortal, I would like you to be my wife. Will you marry me, Willa?" Through happy tears, she said yes. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that brought together vampire nobility and human dignitaries, ancient tradition and modern sensibility. Willa wore a gown of white silk and lace, and Constantine looked devastating in formal black. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promising love, partnership, and eternity. The reception was held at the castle where they'd first talked about turning, and as they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Willa remembered the ball where this had all begun, where she'd stepped on his foot and made him laugh, where everything had changed. "What are you thinking?" Constantine murmured, holding her close. "That I'm grateful for clumsy feet and impossible chances," Willa replied. He laughed, that same warm, genuine laugh she'd fallen in love with. "As am I, my darling wife. As am I." The remaining years of Willa's humanity passed quickly. She and Constantine settled into married life with ease, supporting each other's work, traveling when they could, building a life that spanned both the human and vampire worlds. As the 10-year mark approached, Constantine began asking more frequently if she was certain about turning. Each time, Willa's answer was the same: yes. She was 34 now, still young by human standards, but aware of time's passage in a way she hadn't been at 24. She saw the first fine lines appearing at the corners of her eyes, noticed that recovering from late nights took a bit longer. Meanwhile, Constantine looked exactly as he had the night they met, eternally young, eternally beautiful. She was ready. They chose the date together, the 10th anniversary of the blood moon ball where they'd met. It felt appropriate, symmetrical, a closing of one circle and the opening of another. Constantine insisted on explaining the process in clinical detail, making absolutely certain Willa understood what she was choosing. The turning would take 3 days of agony as the venom spread through her system, rewriting her biology at the cellular level. She would have to drain nearly all her human blood and replace it with vampire blood. There would be a period of adjustment after, learning to control new instincts and abilities. And there was still that chance, small but real, that her body would reject the transformation and she would die. "I'm not afraid," Willa told him the night before her turning. "Or maybe I am, a little. But I'm more afraid of not doing this, of leaving you alone again." They spent that last day of her humanity doing simple human things. They ate at her favorite restaurant, a last real meal before her diet would change to blood alone. They walked through the city in daylight, letting the sun warm Willa's skin one final time. They called Piper, who had become a dear friend to both of them, and said their goodbyes. As sunset approached, they returned to the penthouse. Constantine had prepared everything: a comfortable room where Willa could rest during the transformation, medical equipment in case of complications, bags of blood for after. "Last chance to change your mind," he said, only half joking. Willa cupped his face in her hands. "I love you, Constantine Ravenscar. I choose this. I choose you. I choose forever." He kissed her deeply, desperately, then led her to the prepared room. She lay down on the bed, and he settled beside her. "It will hurt," he warned. "Please remember that I love you, that this pain is temporary, that I would take it on myself if I could." "I know," Willa said. "I trust you." Constantine bared his fangs, something he rarely did around her, always careful not to frighten her. They were elegant and deadly sharp. He positioned himself over her, his mouth near her throat, and paused one last time. "I love you," he said. "I love you too," Willa replied. "Now make me immortal." His fangs pierced her throat, and the world dissolved into sensation. The initial bite was sharp but brief. Then came the venom, flooding into her bloodstream like liquid fire. Constantine drank deeply, draining her blood with careful precision, knowing exactly how far he could push her system. When she was on the edge of death, her heartbeat slow and thready, he bit into his own wrist and pressed it to her lips. "Drink, my love. Drink and live." Vampire blood tasted like copper and roses, and something indefinable, ancient and powerful. Willa drank, and felt the blood spread through her system, fighting with the venom, transforming her from the inside out. Then, the real pain began. She'd been warned, but nothing could have truly prepared her. It felt like every cell in her body was being torn apart and rebuilt, like she was burning from the inside out. She screamed until her voice gave out, writhed until Constantine had to hold her down to keep her from hurting herself. He stayed with her every moment, murmuring words of love and encouragement, cooling her forehead with damp cloths, never leaving her side. The pain lasted 3 days, just as he'd said. 3 days of agony that felt like 3 lifetimes. But slowly, gradually, the pain began to recede. Her body accepted the changes, integrated the vampire blood, stabilized into its new form. On the 4th day, Willa opened her eyes. The world looked different, sharper, clearer, full of details she'd never noticed before. She could see individual dust motes floating in the air, could count the threads in the curtains, could hear conversations from apartments several floors below. And she felt strong, powerful, alive in a way she'd never experienced as a human. Constantine sat beside the bed, looking haggard despite his immortal beauty. He'd clearly spent the entire 3 days at her side without rest. When he saw her eyes open, his expression transformed with relief and joy. "Willa, how do you feel?" She sat up, moved too fast, and found herself standing across the room without quite knowing how she'd gotten there. Vampire speed would take some getting used to. "I feel amazing," she said, marveling at the sound of her own voice, richer, clearer than before. "Constantine, is this how you experience the world all the time?" He stood, moving to her with his own fluid grace. "Yes. Welcome to immortality, my love." She looked at her hands, still her hands, but the skin was paler now, flawless, with a subtle luminescence. She caught sight of herself in a mirror and gasped. Her hair had lightened to a silvery blonde, and her eyes were no longer brown, but a clear, bright amber. "I'm beautiful," she whispered, not from vanity, but from simple wonder. "You are always beautiful," Constantine said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "But yes, the transformation enhances certain features. You look like you were always meant to be vampire." Willa turned in his arms, and for the first time, they stood as equals, both immortal, both powerful, both forever. She kissed him, marveling at how much more intense everything felt with her enhanced senses. "Thank you," she said against his lips, "for giving me this. For giving me forever with you. Or, thank you for choosing it," he replied. "For choosing me." The adjustment period was challenging, but manageable. Willa had to learn to control her new strength. She broke a dozen glasses and several door handles in the first week before getting the hang of it. The thirst for blood was intense, but not overwhelming, especially with Constantine teaching her to manage it properly. She couldn't go out in daylight anymore, which was the hardest adjustment. She mourned the sun, grieved for bright mornings and warm afternoons, but she found new beauty in the night in stars and moonlight and the secret life of the city after dark. And she had Constantine, her partner in this new existence. They hunted together, learned together, grew together. Piper visited often, one of the few humans who moved easily between both worlds, and promised to be there through Willa's transition into vampire society. 6 months after her turning, the Vampire Council held a formal ceremony to recognize Willa's new status. She was presented to the court as Willa Ravenscar, vampire queen consort, and given a position of real authority within the governance structure. Standing beside Constantine on the dais, looking out at the assembled vampires and human dignitaries, Willa thought about how far she'd come from that terrified girl in a midnight blue dress, stumbling through a waltz with the vampire king. "What are you thinking?" Constantine murmured, too quietly for anyone else to hear. "That I'd step on your foot again in a heartbeat if it meant getting to this moment," Willa replied. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together, both of them pale now, both immortal, both exactly where they belonged. "Then I'm grateful for every stumble," he said, "because each one led us here." The ceremony proceeded with all the formal pomp required of vampire tradition, but Willa barely noticed. She was too busy planning their future, the centuries stretching ahead, full of possibility and promise. She would continue her work building bridges between humans and vampires, but now she could do it as someone who truly embodied both worlds. She would help shape vampire society, making it more open and adaptable. She would travel the world with Constantine, learning and growing and experiencing everything immortality had to offer. And through it all, she would love him fiercely, eternally, without reservation. After the ceremony, they retreated to the penthouse for a private celebration. Constantine had arranged for music, a quartet playing soft, romantic pieces, and he led her onto the balcony under the stars. "May I have this dance, my queen?" he asked with mock formality. "Always," Willa replied. They moved together in perfect synchronization, both vampire graceful now, both lost in the music and each other. Willa didn't step on his feet once. "You know," Constantine said as they swayed together, "I think I might miss your occasional clumsiness." It was endearing. Willa deliberately stomped on his foot, though with vampire durability it didn't hurt either of them. Constantine threw his head back and laughed that same wonderful laugh she'd fallen in love with and pulled her closer. "Perfect," he said, "absolutely perfect." And it was. Not because everything was easy or simple, but because they'd chosen each other through every difficulty, every challenge, every impossibility. They'd built something real and lasting out of a chance encounter and a moment of laughter. Years turned into decades, and Willa and Constantine became legendary within both vampire and human circles. They were known as the partnership that proved cross-species love could work, that bridged worlds and brought about real, lasting change in how humans and vampires interacted. Willa watched Piper grow old and eventually pass away, mourned her with the deep grief of immortals losing those they love. But she also found new friends, both human and vampire, and learned to cherish each connection while it lasted. She and Constantine ruled the vampire territories with wisdom and compassion, modernizing ancient laws while respecting tradition, always pushing for greater understanding between their people and humanity. They traveled the world, explored new places and old, made love in castles and caves and under countless stars. They argued and made up, challenged and supported each other, grew in ways neither could have managed alone. And every year, on the anniversary of the Blood Moon Ball, they returned to that cathedral and danced together, remembering the night a clumsy human girl stepped on a vampire king's foot and changed both their lives forever. On their 100th anniversary, standing in the same spot where they'd first met, Constantine pulled Willa close and whispered, "Do you ever regret it? Choosing this life?" Willa looked around the cathedral filled now with their friends and allies, both human and vampire, all celebrating a love story that had spanned a century. She thought about everything they'd built together, every life they'd touched, every moment of joy and sorrow they'd shared. "Not for a single second," she said. "You?" "Never," Constantine replied. "You are the best thing that's ever happened to me in 500 years of existence. You make immortality worth living." They kissed, and the assembled crowd erupted in applause. But Willa barely heard it. She was too focused on the man in her arms, the partner she'd chosen and would continue choosing for all eternity. Because some love stories don't end. Some transcend the boundaries of mortality and time, burning bright through the centuries, proof that even in a world of darkness and danger, hope and love can flourish. Willa Ravenscar, once a nervous human girl with 2 left feet, had stepped into her destiny the moment she'd stepped on the Vampire King's foot. And she'd been dancing ever since, through joy and sorrow, through challenges and triumphs, through every moment of their shared immortal life. As the celebration continued around them, as music swelled and friends toasted to another 100 years, Willa rested her head against Constantine's chest and smiled. "Forever," she whispered. "Forever," he agreed. And in the end, that was exactly what they got, a love that truly did last for eternity, born from laughter and sealed with a kiss, enduring through everything the world could throw at them. Their story became legend, told and retold through the years, the tale of the human who danced with the vampire king and won his heart, who chose immortality not for power or eternal youth, but for love. Young vampires heard it and believed in the possibility of true partnership across the species divide. Humans heard it and found hope that the ancient treaty could evolve into something more than just political necessity. But for Willa and Constantine, it wasn't a legend or a fairy tale. It was simply their life, messy and beautiful, challenging and rewarding, filled with both ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. They continued to rule wisely, to love fiercely, to dance under the stars whenever the mood struck them. They built a legacy not just of political achievement, but of genuine connection, proving that the barriers between humans and vampires were never as insurmountable as they seemed. And on quiet nights, when they were alone together in their penthouse sanctuary, Constantine would sometimes pull Willa close and thank her again for that fateful stumble at the Blood Moon Ball. "Thank you for stepping on my foot," he'd say. "Thank you for making me laugh. Thank you for choosing me." And Willa would kiss him and reply, "Thank you for seeing past my clumsiness to who I really was. Thank you for loving me as human and as vampire. Thank you for forever." Because in the end, that was what their story was really about, not vampires or politics or the challenges of immortal life, but two souls finding each other across impossible odds and choosing every single day to keep choosing each other. The vampire king and his human-turned-vampire queen lived on. Their love a beacon in the darkness, their partnership a testament to what was possible when courage and compassion overcome fear and prejudice. They faced new challenges as the centuries progressed, adapted to changing times and cultures, but their core remained constant. They loved each other, supported each other, believed in each other, and they lived happily ever after, in the truest sense of those words, not because their life was perfect or easy, but because they faced it together as partners and equals for all of eternity. The girl who couldn't dance became the queen who transformed a kingdom. The lonely king became a devoted husband who learned that love was worth any risk. Together, they wrote a new story not just for themselves, but for all the humans and vampires who would come after them, showing that the greatest magic of all isn't found in immortality or supernatural power, but in the simple, profound act of loving someone with your whole heart and choosing them over and over again through all the days and nights of forever.